It's nice to see some familiar faces and friends here, and I want to thank my family for being here. My wife Rose, my sons AJ, and my daughter Xavier, and my friend Kyle. I'm here to talk about the virtue of circumspection. So when Notre had asked me to do a talk on circumspection, I had never heard of the word. I now know it's a virtue. But first, for a second, at first I thought it was some kind of medical procedure. It doesn't, I guess I couldn't talk about that. It has, that has some deep foundational history in the Bible, but I'm glad I'm not here to talk about something as painful as that. But I'll definitely dive into the virtue of circumspection in a bit. But first, a little intro on myself. As Paul mentioned, I'm from California. I was born and raised. Grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles, in Upland, California, about 35 miles east of Los Angeles. My parents both immigrated from the Philippines in the mid-1960s, and I'm the eldest of four siblings. Being second generation Filipino, grew up with culture at home, with food and traditions, as well as religion, right? So the Philippines is one of the most Catholic countries in Asia. And my parents brought that with them, but how I saw them actually grow in the faith is, I was a kid growing up. Being raised Roman Catholic, we were devout Catholic, they were devout Catholic Christians. So they as a kid, they decided to send me to CCD, right? If you haven't heard of CCD, that's the catechism class, to prepare me for First Communion and all the sacraments. And of all things, they decided to, I was in public school at the time. Of all things, they decided to send me to Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic school as a kid. I was not happy. So I wanted to be with my friends at my other school. Of course, I cried at my mom and said, I didn't want to go there. I had to stay at the school I was at. And, Our Lady of Lourdes turned out to be the best thing for me because of the best friends I made. And this is where I became passionate and excelled in basketball and things like that. And getting you rooted in the Catholic faith, right? And all the things you learn as a kid, repetitiously. And then my journey kind of continued, spending 4 years at all-boys Catholic school, Damien High School in Vernon, California. So we went to Mass every Sunday growing up, and I had the faith. I went through the normal sacraments and everything, but I think at times, I felt like I was just going through the motions, right? Because we were told we had to do that. You got to do this, do that, do the sacraments and the prayers. I didn't understand truly the holiness of the aspects of the Mass I was taught at home and in school, but somehow, I knew the Eucharist was holy, right? You had that in your mind. And, my parents left an indelible mark of the Catholic faith on me as I was growing up, as we did the night, without hesitation. We did the Psalms every night, prayed the Rosary every night. I know a lot of the Psalms by heart. Today's responsorial Psalm, Psalm 103, right? Bless the Lord, O my soul. A lot of these are ingrained in my mind as a kid. But even knowing this faith, in my college years, I really strayed away from going to Mass on Sundays. Fast forward even into my married life, me and my friends, we had basketball on Sundays with my friends going to our early 20s to late 30s, and there was just no time for Mass, no time for God, right? Only to where we would just go to Mass on major holidays like Easter and Christmas. I feel we try to also raise our kids to grow up in the Catholic faith as we did put them through the normal sacraments as well. But I feel we didn't practice and nurture the faith as much, and we definitely could have done a better job of that. The way my parents really instilled that in me, right? But looking back, I see, that's why, because we're cradle Catholics, we're born into the faith, we're baptized as infants. And as far as being baptized in the faith, rather than someone who converted, I feel like I'm maybe borderline reverts. We stepped away and now back into the faith. And I'm glad that I had that foundation growing up, to lean on. So pretty much I'm married to my beautiful wife Rose for 28 years. And we have 3 beautiful children. And we made the move from California to Tennessee in November 2019 when my company relocated to Franklin from Orange County, California. And then my wife and kids followed, moving later during and after the pandemic. So it was a challenging time. I was going back and forth from Tennessee to California during the majority of 2020 and 2021. Fast forward to now, this is our 6th year in Tennessee, and my wife and I couldn't be happier and more blessed to be here. I believe God had plans for us despite all our challenges with our move during the pandemic. We received the grace to be here in an environment that is more welcoming, with opportunities to meet new friends and join St. Philip's Parish. These blessings have brought us closer to our Catholic faith. So I do owe this grace and blessing to Paul and Mildred. If we ever met them on Easter sunrise service in April of 2022, when Father Ed was late. I wouldn't be discussing this topic. I'm about to share on the virtue of circumspection today. Now, I can tell you this, I never would have thought of speaking in this type of form on a topic such as this, let alone, attend First Saturday devotion of the PO regularly. But we've started to do those things. It's not that I didn't want to do that back in California, it's just maybe the opportunity never presented itself. And however, I now know I would not have done this had I not taken the step to open up my heart back up to my Catholic roots. So I'll be discussing the virtue of circumspection, its general meaning and examples, how it can be used in your spiritual life. I'll dive into how my saint for 2026, St. Francis Cabrini, or Mother Cabrini, used circumspection in her life, and then kind of touch upon the correlation between forgiveness and circumspection, because the two really go hand in hand, right? Then I'll conclude with some final thoughts, but really my goal is to help you understand the virtue so you can really kind of unlock it and utilize this virtue called circumspection. So the general meaning of circumspection is really the quality of being careful, thoughtful, and aware of possible risks or consequences before acting or speaking, right? Someone who shows circumspection doesn't rush, they pause, consider the situation and circumstances from different angles, right? In order to determine the best course of action, really, right? That's the key. In everyday terms, it's like having an internal pause button, again, as I said, think before you act, notice potential problems, avoid unnecessary trouble, make wiser decisions, right? Doesn't that sound like a game of chess? Anyone know how to play chess? Right? It's a game of strategy, and it doesn't, it's think before you act, right, in the game. Anticipate traps and potential problems, right? Avoiding trouble by ultimately making wise moves or decisions, ensure that you can checkmate your opponent, right, for the victory. That's circumspection. That game requires a lot of that. How about, like, in business, like you're sending an email out, in communication. It applies to your everyday work, right? Before sending a sensitive email, you kind of want to reread it, right, to make sure that the tone is right, or you're not offending anybody when you're sending it out. How many times have you had to recall an email, right? Because you don't think you said something bad or wrong, and you want to correct yourself. So that's the quality of circumspection. Like, how about going shopping? You know, you want to buy something pretty expensive, you want to think about a big purchase, but you take a day to think it over. Basically, that's utilizing circumspection, right? You would utilize that virtue. Am I going to get in trouble with a life if I buy this truck? Listing out the pros and cons. Maybe if I get her a gift, it will soften the blow. Or do I buy her roses on her birthday even though she knows she doesn't like flowers, right? You got to think about these things, right? The idea is good, but will it result in the best outcome, right? So that's just an example there. How about asking advice from others on important decisions, such as when you need feedback on your behavior, right? Am I a better person when I'm hanging out with this group of people versus this group of people? Where should I go to college, or what should I study, right? Whether to switch jobs or should I stay put? You know, you gotta weigh your options. Finances. How will doing certain things now impact my future, right? If I invest in a Roth IRA now, while I'm young, and I invest X dollars monthly, will I become comfortable by the time I retire, right? Things like that. See the movie Gladiator, you know the famous quote, what we do in life echoes in eternity, right? Spoken by Maximus in the film. You know, that means that our present actions, choices, and character possess a lasting impact that transcends our mortal existence. It suggests that every deed, whether significant or small, leaves a permanent legacy that shapes the future and influences others. And so that quote teaches us mindful action, right? It also teaches us preventing irreversible mistakes, right? So for mindful action, to make our actions echo well, we must act with core wisdom and prudence, the very definition of circumspection. I mentioned preventing irreversible mistakes, right? Because that echo is permanent, circumspection serves as a guard against rash, emotional, or harmful decisions, allowing us to act with long-term reverence, right? In summary, if what we do in life echoes in eternity is the ultimate long-term consequence of our lives, then circumspection is kind of a daily recipe for that. Right? Your moment-to-moment habit of pausing, taking time to reflect, seeking advice if needed, and considering circumstances for your best course of action. So, bringing circumspection into your spiritual life, that virtue can be surprisingly grounding. It's not about being timid or overcautious. It's about moving through your inner life with awareness, humility and intention. Here's 7 ways to kind of weave it in meaningfully into your life. 1, slow down before reacting. Spiritual growth often happens in the pause. Circumspection helps you notice your impulses. Ask yourself what's driving you, right? It turns knee-jerk reactions into conscious choices. For instance, take a moment to think about, before responding to a question or a comment or even a joke, consider things from different points of view, right? 2, examine your motivations. Circumspection invites you to look inward. Why am I drawn to this path or practice or decision, right? Is it coming from love, fear, or longing? This kind of self-honesty deepens spiritual integrity. 3, be mindful of the impact of your words, right? I try to work on that. Beware of the power of speech, right? Circumspection helps you speak with kindness, avoid unnecessary conflict, honor the dignity of others. It's a way of practicing compassion in real time. Number 4, discern what influences you. Circumspection helps you choose what you allow into your inner world, right? Teachings, community, relationships, habits. It's not about shutting things out, right? It's about letting things in that nourish your spirit. 5, reflect before making commitments, whether it's a spiritual practice, a community role, or a personal vow. Circumspection helps you, understand the weight of your commitments, avoid overextending yourself, honor what you say you'll do. You know, I'm a big believer of I do what I say and say what I do, right? And so when you do that, then this builds trust with other people. 6, use circumspection as a form of humility. It reminds you that you don't have all the answers, right? It's okay to be wrong. You can grow from that, from those things. Humility is one of the most powerful spiritual catalysts. And then 7, create space for reflection, right? Like today. Circumspection thrives in quiet moments. You can support it through, prayer. You can journal, meditation, time in nature. Go take a walk, right? Just make time, right? These practices help you see your life with clarity instead of urgency. And so, wanted to talk about St. Frances Cabrini and just a little bit of background. Her life really evolved around using circumspection. So, first off, St. Frances Xavier Cabrini, often called Mother Cabrini. She's my saint for 2026, and she was an Italian-American Catholic nun and the first American citizen to be canonized as a saint. She founded the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, dedicated to education, healthcare, and service to the poor. She is best known for her tireless work with Italian immigrants in the U.S., especially in New York and Chicago. She ended up building 67 institutions comprised of schools, hospitals, and orphanages to support communities in the U.S., Europe, and South America facing poverty and discrimination. She is the patron saint of immigrants, hospital administrators, and impossible causes. Well, with that resume, she's a beautiful example of circumspection in action, right? Not as hesitation, but as a disciplined, spiritually grounded way of making decisions. Her life shows how careful discernment can coexist with bold, world-changing action. Mother Cabrini was such a compelling figure, and it's uncanny how I ended up picking this saint, and then a couple of months later, Mildred asked me to talk about circumspection. Talk about a saint that fits the virtue of circumspection like a glove. Here's some of the clearest ways she embodied circumspection. 1, she discerned before acting, even when the need was urgent. Mother Cabrini constantly encountered overwhelming human suffering, immigrants without homes, children without education, communities without health care. Yet, she didn't rush blindly into projects. She prayed before major decisions. She sought counsel from trusted advisors. She evaluated the long-term sustainability of each mission. Her circumspection made her courage effective rather than chaotic. 2, she assessed risks realistically, not fearfully. Cabrini traveled across oceans despite her fragile health, founded institutions with almost no resources, and entered dangerous neighborhoods to serve the poor. But she didn't do these things recklessly, right? She studied the social and political landscapes of those areas. She understood the dangers that the immigrants faced. And she prepared her sisters carefully before sending them into new missions. Her circumspection allowed her to take risks that were purposeful, not impulsive. And 3, she adapted her plans when circumstances changed, right? One of her most famous moments of circumspection was when she originally wanted to go to China. And Pope Leo XIII told her, not to the east, to the west. You're going west. She didn't stubbornly cling to her original plan, right? She reflected, she accepted guidance, she recognized God's will in the redirection. Circumspection in that moment helped her distinguish between personal desire and divine calling. 4, she protected her sisters with thoughtful leadership. Cabrini was responsible for the safety and spiritual well-being of her missionary sisters. Her circumspection showed up in choosing safe housing, ensuring financial stability. Right? She combined maternal care with strategic foresight. Foresight was a topic that Brother Joe talked about last month, that virtue. 5, she examined her own motives constantly. Cabrini was known for her humility. She practiced circumspection inwardly by checking her intentions, guarding against her pride. You know, this interior vigilance kept her grounded even as her influence grew, right? She's become pretty big, doing all these things. 6, she balanced bold faith with practical wisdom. Her circumspection didn't dampen her zeal and challenge. She trusted God deeply, but she also kept meticulous records, right? Managed finances carefully. You know, she planned institutions that would last beyond her lifetime. You know, this blend of faith and prudence is why so many of her schools, hospitals, and orphanages still exist today. So remember the quote from Gladiator, what we do in life echoes in eternity? What Mother Cabrini did in her life still echoes in today, based on all that. So I also wanted to talk about the correlation between forgiveness and circumspection. You know, forgiveness and circumspection might seem like they're, they live in different emotional worlds, right? Forgiveness over here and circumspection over here. One is warm and releasing, the other is careful and discerning. But spiritually, they actually reinforce each other in a powerful way. When you put them side by side, you get kind of a wise compassion that protects your heart without hardening it. Here's how they connect. Forgiveness softens the heart. It's about letting go of resentment. It's about releasing the desire to retaliate, choosing peace over bitterness. It frees your inner life so that you're not chained to someone else's actions. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened, right? Or allowing repeated harm, and that's where circumspection comes in. Circumspection protects the heart. Circumspection helps you reflect what happened, right? Understand patterns, set healthy boundaries, avoid repeating painful cycles. It's the spiritual pause that asks, what's the wise way forward, right? So together, the two things create kind of this mature mercy. When forgiveness and circumspection work together, you get a balanced approach. Forgiveness without circumspection, you might forgive quickly, but then leave yourself vulnerable to the same wounds. Circumspection without forgiveness, you may become guarded, suspicious, or closed off. But both together, you release the emotional burden and learn from the experience. You stay compassionate and grounded. You keep your heart open without abandoning your well-being. Right? This is the kind of spiritual mercy that even Mother Cabrini practiced, right? Mercy guided by wisdom. So forgiveness heals the wound. Circumspection prevents the re-injury. To conclude, having studied and researched this virtue of circumspection has really been eye-opening for me. I didn't even know I was applying this to my everyday life at work or traveling or taking care of my family, and especially moving physically from California to Tennessee. I always just call it planning and preparing for the worst or preparing for any bumps. Right? But the attribute of adjusting to circumstances and having to change or redirect plans and seek advice to make wise decisions could not be further from the truth that circumspection is good to have. I think it's required. Yes, I would not have become who I am and where I'm at today without careful planning, but to have the virtue of circumspection in your tool bag, that's a gift and a virtue worth increasing your awareness and increasing your utilization of it. So therefore, in a spiritual sense, circumspection is allowing me to pause and reflect. It helps me make space and time for meditating and morning and evening prayer and making time for Mass. For relationships and interaction, it helps me avoid unnecessary conflict and trying to be mindful of the impact on my words, etc. Right? For communication, I try to use circumspection also to just make time for my kids. Because I know one day, I may not see them as much. My thinking is, looking ahead, spending time with them now before they have the life of their own, right? That's kind of circumspection in action in a way, right? Just looking at that future outlook. So I'd like to leave you with this. This Lenten season, I joined the Lent Pray 40 Challenge on the Owl app. If you don't have the app, I highly recommend it, and I encourage you to use it. Last Friday's session was with Mark Wahlberg, and he discussed the topic of fasting, which totally gave me an aha moment. Because, I realized that what he talked about was totally connected to the virtue of circumspection, right? He referenced that fasting is not just about food or giving up something that you like, right? He brought up something I totally wanted to share. How about fasting from judgment, right? Maybe someone cut you off on the road, or someone said something that upsets you, or you observe someone's not dressed properly for an event, or you just wanted to comment on someone's ugly hairstyle. I wouldn't have to worry about that. But you can use circumspection to just pause and preserve judgment and not point fingers. Right? In that session, Mark Wahlberg said, hey, how about, point a finger at yourself. Ask yourself, what can you do better to be more nice, to be more giving, to have more humility, to be more non-judgmental and withhold negative criticism. Use circumspection in that way. That's a perfect example of putting circumspection into practice. Maybe this Lent we can do that. But maybe not every day this Lent, but how about once a week, right? You try to challenge yourself to consciously be more circumspect. Utilize the virtue by fasting from judgment with about, are we halfway through? 30 days left to go before Easter. So to conclude, I'd like to close with a short prayer centered on this virtue of circumspection. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of wisdom, grant me a calm and discerning spirit. Help me pause before I speak, reflect before I act,